right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 28 of Plays Well with Others, our podcast about building and participating in highly effective, high performing teams and actually enjoying doing it. So, as always, I'm your host, Andrew Moore, and I'm joined by my illustrious co host, Jess Agnew. So, in the last episode, we talked about onboarding as both a new employee and an employer that has a new employee starting, and we touched a lot. So if you haven't heard any of the last three episodes, they're actually pretty good, if I do say so myself. Go back and listen to them because we went through the process of interviewing. So how to interview as a hiring manager, how to interview as a prospective employee, and we talked about in that third episode we talked about that onboarding process. And as that went on, we sort of touched on the bookends of a job. So how to onboard, how to know how to get started, what are the things that I should be working on, what are the important things that I can do, and how to offboard, how to know when it's time to move on to greener pastures, so to speak. And the thing that Jess and I were talking about after that, because we like to try to keep things fresh and keep the segues going, keep all these things tied together. What we were talking about is what happens in the middle, and how can you
hmm
stave off that exit unless it's absolutely necessary. And the thing that came to mind was it's not your employer's responsibility to advance your career, because what we said was
Well, I would say
when
it's not solely their responsibility.
I might argue that point if I were in more of a pedantic mood, but I'll let it slide. It isn't solely your employer's responsibility to advance your career. A good manager will absolutely be interested in helping their employees progress, but
Yeah.
they don't do that because they're required to do that. They do that because they're good people. But as we were talking about it, because it's not, because you shouldn't be sitting around waiting for a promotion or sitting around largely disengaged or just flowing through the minutia of your day. What should you be doing? You should be networking, you should be building your skill sets as well as the people that you know, so that you have a wider reach, you have a wider understanding of what possibilities are out there. Because ideally, if you have a rich community, one that is investing in you and you and them, then a lot of the shenanigans of work that might lead you to find different opportunity, that has become less impactful. They become less sticking because you are focused on your greater progression, how you get better at doing what you need to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity for anyone in any role that they're in to get the most out of their current role. And I mean, obviously there's outlier cases, but you're not always going to have everything handed to you. And I would argue that the best colleagues that I've worked with, the best employees that I've had underneath me are the ones who have that ability to go find the answers, go talk to people, go ask questions, to be open to conversation, to try and put themselves out there to learn about what they're trying to wrap their arms around, right? What they're working on, what they're trying to build from a process or a project or whatever that state might be. And it's just that first step can be really hard, you know? Like it can be almost like physically exhausting to have to reach out to someone and go, "Hey, like I want to learn about what you do, or I want to understand this better. Hey, I was pointed in your direction by so and so because they said you were the one who knew about this. Could I put a half hour on your calendar to learn more about what you do here and what this process is that you're working on?" It can be hard. Just that first step of reaching out and kind of trying to connect. I personally find it significantly easier to do that with people that I work with right now because we're all being paid by the same company. We're all there to do a job together. They're my teammates, no matter how high up in the company or how, wherever they are in the pecking order, we're all on the same team. We're all working towards the same goal. So I don't mind doing it so much here. I have personally a hard time doing that outside of work, and I don't enjoy networking outside of an office setting. And part of that's because I don't really want people reaching out to me. So I feel guilty if I'm reaching out to you. So I like to get over that hurdle by joining groups like Women in Technology membership or something like that, because then I know that they're invested and they want to be participants in this. I like to do it in that sort of setting. So I don't feel, because I wouldn't mind it in that particular setting. So I feel like, okay, you're choosing to be here. You know what this is about. You're probably more open than just random person on LinkedIn.
See, I kind of look at it differently. Especially because we've been working remote since 2020, so almost 4 years now, 3.5 years, something like that. I find it progressively more difficult to talk to people in a group setting than I do in
Well,
the wide world.
you can generally get a list of who's a member. And that's where I would say I could reach out and say, hey, I noticed you're a member of this group. So am I. I'm going to be going to this meeting, or what did you think of this, or something like that. So it's more of a,
Yeah, yeah.
I know that they have an interest in the same thing that I do, or they're invested in the same organization that I'm in. It's more of an in with a person than it is like any particular event that I'm trying to go to.
Well, so using that as a segue, let's talk about the elephant in the room, LinkedIn or social media. Jess and I were also talking about this before the episode started. You can look at LinkedIn a couple of different ways. So we've both been making content on LinkedIn, whether it be through this podcast or through our own stuff for 3 6 months, something like that now. Actually, for me, it's been like 9 months. Wow. But that can be a good avenue to start conversations with people and
Mm-hmm.
not just making your own stuff, because when I started, in some ways it feels like you're just yelling off into the void, like, here, take this
Is
thing that
anyone
I made.
listening?
Right. I made this, anybody want it? And that's weird in a way, but I found a lot of people through changing my mindset about how I think about introductions. Is my experience largely over my entire career with LinkedIn has been, it's for salespeople to reach out to me and recruiters to reach out to me. And generally, there's not a ton of value being provided by those LinkedIn messages. It's, hey, name, tell me when I can call you. Yeah, let's not do that. But what I've bumped up against is the more that I engage with very specific individuals, very specific vendors as I need a thing, sooner or later I get past the sales layer into the tech layer. I'm not I'm not disparaging salespeople. I know it's not a job that I would want.
Tough. I would not be
Right.
good at it.
Right. So I know you got a job to do, but I'm also just telling you, I don't pay attention to most of these cold messages. But when I do find some people that are, we speak the same language, we're on the same page, I can have conversations with somebody that isn't in my company, so there's not as much stakes, not as much at stake, and it's almost like I am just shooting the bull with somebody that also does the same thing. And we don't really get to do that anymore, especially for me living where I do. And there's like a dozen technical people here, and we don't all go to the same bars. But I think it is important when you talk about LinkedIn or you talk about anything networking, it's important to know why you do it. You're not you're not out there trying to get a bunch of people in a list that you can call if you need a job. You're trying to find like-minded individuals or differently minded individuals that you can engage in discourse and learn from, whether they're more experienced or less experienced. You're iron sharpening iron, so to speak. You've got this community of people that can all generally collaborate around the same problems. And then stuff happens like AI, and we all get all fired up about stuff, and you get to see other people's work in a professional setting rather than Facebook.
Yeah. There is a lot of benefit to having a network of people who are in the same sphere as you that do exist outside of the same company, because you can have the opportunity to talk to them about, like, how did you solve this problem? And if you have that relationship with someone who works at another company in the same industry, or another company, maybe different industry but similar role, you can talk to them about, hey, we're facing this challenge. How did you approach it? What did you think? Stuff like that can be really valuable, bouncing ideas off of each other. And then they'll call you and say, hey, how did you solve this problem? And that kind of relationship is just incredibly valuable to have. And, having done this for as many years as I have, those just sort of naturally happened for me, right? Like, I didn't go out and look for this person who was in the same role as me. We worked together
Mhm.
10 years ago, or 12 years ago, or 15 years ago. And now we are just kind of like, oh, hey, I called you up because we did this together and I was trying to remember how we did this thing, or what we did there. And they might do the same for me. Or do you still have that document? No, I never have that document. I don't keep documents from previous companies ever.
As we've
but
talked about before, I absolutely have that document, and none of it is IP, so don't worry about it.
if it's my document that I created, not another company's document, I will have it. But if it's like a company's document, I won't have it. But anyways, it's just funny to kind of like see how that just sort of like naturally grew for me, and where maybe I didn't do a good enough job fostering a relationship. So I lost a contact that I wish I still had, versus where I've done a good job of just, the occasional text or the occasional meme or whatever it might be, that I just kind of, send them something to stay in contact with them, so that those avenues of communication remain open in case either of us want to take advantage of it in the future.
Well, that's a really good point, because I've found that throughout my entire life, I build good relationships with people, and then circumstances take us apart. Whether it's a job change or a
Yeah.
school change or whatever. And from there on, like, you're dead to me. I don't know who you are. Like, I am
Yeah.
terrible at keeping up with people. Like, here's a perfect example. My best friend in the world, my best man in my wedding. We lived together for years. We left school, moved apart. We lived maybe 5 miles apart from each other and didn't know it for like 4 years
Oh
before
my god.
he texted me one day and was like, "Hey, we should probably hang out." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're probably right." And then it was all good, but not in front of my face. Not good at keeping up with people, and that's where it's
Yeah.
important. You got to be intentional to a degree. At the very least, you've got
Yeah.
this device, right, that maintains every phone number you've ever known for the past 20 years.
Pro tip: add the company that you met him at, and that will help ring a bell in case you start to lose track of whose name is whose.
I've
This
done
is for
that
those
in
older folks out there.
I've done that in the notes section on the contact, because
Yeah, you just put
it
their first name, last name, and then it has an option for company, and you put the company in
well,
there if you've
here
got an iPhone.
I think maybe I've done this wrong. And this may be Andrew's an old person now comment, but I started adding the company into people's names, and there are scenarios where if I want to call the company and I ask my automated assistant that I'm not going to say her name of, if I ask them to call the company, then it will dial the person in my contact rather than getting the
Oh,
number off the internet. And that's a little
yeah.
bit it's a little bit distracting when I intended to call the front desk of a place and my
Yeah, I
buddy
recommend you put it in
answers.
the
Yeah,
company section in your contact thing.
maybe I'm doing
But
that wrong.
it's interesting because I think for me, I was actually talking to my brother about this not too long ago, about how I tend to kind of approach relationships where if we don't see each other for a year, there is relationships just on hold for me. Like, it's just paused. And when we see each other again, we just unpause and I pick up exactly where we left off. And I tend to do that across the board, whether it's work or personal life or whatever. For me, it's like no time has passed when I see you again. And that works really well with some people and is a little jarring for other people where they're like, whoa, you're acting like we're super close and we haven't seen each other for 3 years. So that's just my natural personality. I'm not going to treat you differently than I did previously just because we haven't seen each other for a long period of time. And that can be really valuable with networking because you see someone again or you talk to someone again and you engage right away with them again and you feel comfortable with them again. Um, but I do think, to Andrew's point, not everyone is going to be like me. In fact, I would dare say the vast majority of people probably aren't like me in that regard, where they require a little maintenance to keep a relationship. So it is a good idea just to kind of have those one-off people that you shoot a text every now and then, check in with them, whatever that might look like. If you're like me, you probably don't love to be on the phone, so texting is a great way to just, hey, wanted to check in, how are you? Just keep up with them, talk to them every now and then. There was an awesome lady I worked with at Nava Health, a company I used to work at, named Deborah, and I love to talk to her on the phone actually every now and then. Just a delight. And it's a great relationship just to kind of keep in touch with her and hear her voice every now and then and hear what's going on in her world. And those can be really valuable.
So I'll play the project manager on this one, and so let's get kind of tactical and practical on this. So we've talked a lot at the high level of why you should be networking and kind of how that's hard. But digging into specifics as an individual, because
Mm-hmm.
I do want to pivot over to the other side of the equation, which is as an employer, what are things you can do to enable community within your
Yeah.
company, within your sphere of influence. But as an individual, as a professional or otherwise, I think it's important that you have a LinkedIn, whether you like it or not. I think you should have it because that's what every hiring manager is going to do when they get your resume. Like we talked about a couple episodes ago, they're going to go over to LinkedIn and they're going to type your name in and they're going to see how does that line up with your resume. So, pro tip, if your LinkedIn doesn't match your resume, red flags, ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
But your LinkedIn needs to be the detail and your resume needs to be the sales brochure. Why is this person awesome? And then I go to LinkedIn and I get more info. And
Yeah.
so you should have a
Those
LinkedIn.
jobs that are too old, that'll make the pages too long. You can
Right.
put them on LinkedIn.
You should have a LinkedIn. You should be using it to an extent. I have good weeks and I have bad weeks, but on the occasion, I've got it on my phone. It's the only social media I have on my phone, and I have it on my laptop. And I'll go look, and every once in a while, I'll see an interesting post or something cool, and I'll engage with it and say, "Hey, thought I liked XYZ about this thing." Sometimes that turns into a discussion. There's a guy, he's a dev advocate or DevRel on LinkedIn that I have never met in person, just connected randomly. I have no idea where he lives, but we've had disagreements, we've had discussions, we've had conversations, and that's been kind of cool. So get a LinkedIn, maintain it, keep it up to date, make it look as good as you can, and then engage with it as you need. And then when you have opportunity in person, I know, deep breath, talk to people and meet people. There's nothing in the world that stresses me out more than walking into a conference by yourself and like it's like high school all over again. I got to figure out
It
which
is.
table to sit
It's
at.
so awkward. Yeah.
But do it. It will be fulfilling and it will be valuable. Just takes a little bit of doing. If you can meet the people on LinkedIn ahead of time and you can strike up a conversation there, then that's the band-aid ripped off and you can say, "Hey, by the way, I'll be at such and such conference next month. Are you going to be there?" "Yeah, well, cool. Let's meet up and have dinner or whatever."
Yeah.
So, as a hiring manager, and I'll prime the pump, but I think there's a lot of approaches that you can take as a hiring manager, as a leader, period, to building community or influencing and encouraging community. I was having a conversation with a guy. It's been about a week or two ago, and he works with a venture capital firm and has a lot of companies in his portfolio. So he's kind of like the CIO advisor type role. And he made an interesting comment. And obviously, your mileage may vary, but as a capital firm, it makes a lot of sense for them to be as invested in the success of their portfolio companies as possible, right? But from a leadership community perspective, he built what he called the CTO guild, the CIO guild, which is essentially it's a Slack channel, or it's a Slack. Wow, I don't know what the Slack collection is
Channel,
called. I think,
team,
yeah, whatever.
group.
Man, I've been using Teams too long. But so he made a Slack team called the CIO Guild, in which all of these disparate technology leaders can get together and bounce ideas off of each other and comment. And it made me think that, especially as you progress in your career at higher levels of leadership, it gets the number of people you can talk to that have the same problems gets drastically smaller, versus being a software engineer. You got Stack Overflow and you've got millions of people that can answer your question, versus getting into a VP role. Not only is the problem more nuanced, you can't just simply ask, how do I develop a data strategy for my company? Well, the questions are many. So having that available to people in your company, to leaders in your company, and helping to share this idea that there are more people that are facing the same problems you are, I think is a good place to start.
I think we as humans always want to feel connected to someone who is similar to ourselves. That's just a natural human instinct. So, building relationships and building a network based on something that we have in common is a really great place to start, which is part of why I look for people in similar groups as me, because we already have a connection and it's a lot easier to build a natural bond into someone because of that.
Yeah. So as a as a leader, Jess, I'm curious what your experience has been with the community building goal.
So, in for the context for what I'm talking about a teams that I've had at that I've been leader of at different companies I've worked at. And one of the things that I think bonds you closest together and allows you to have the strongest network when you're working together as a team is having at least one meeting where you have just your team there every day. You have open communication between the teams and you encourage an atmosphere where you support each other. Oh, you've never done that before? Didn't you do this experience last year? Could you maybe give them some pointers? Could you help them out? You encourage that by praising people for contributing to others and praising people for pouring into their peers. For you make it a reward benefit sort of situation. For that's the kind of behavior that's, you know, positively reinforced within your team. And I know that sounds a little weird, but you can also build a really toxic environment that doesn't have a very collaborative spirit, a very close network, by pitting your team members against each other or having them compete against each other. I never have my team compete against each other. I always have them compete as a team. It's collaborative uh, participation for any sort of, you know, effort that we're going to do together. It's always we win as a team or we lose as a team. Personally, that's how I've felt that we've built a good team dynamic in the past, by making it a safe place for them to talk openly about challenges they're having, name names of who's being a difficult stakeholder so we can talk through it and be honest and be helpful. And I don't mean that in a we toxic side talk sort of conversation. I mean in genuinely go through, okay, let's talk about the situation. Let's figure out how we can approach this. Let's figure out how we can be the bigger person in this situation, because you're not going to win anything by going back and throwing shade at this person. You want to be the better person. So that's been my personal experience with kind of building an environment within your organization that can be considered a really good networked team.
Yeah, and I think by and large I've experienced similar. One interesting approach that I've used in the past. And it was the world was vastly different back then in 2015.
Probably not even that long ago. Okay, that was a
Right.
little.
I mean, it is a bit. But what we did was so our goal was to really, we were doing DevRel before, so developer relations. It's this idea of like, instead of marketing a company, you're marketing an experience, you're marketing what it's like to be a developer at a company so that other developers want to work there, and you're not you're not quite churning so much on recruiting and managing
Yeah.
applications and all that. So this was before this became a job title, which it is now, and it's a whole practice and field of study. But our goal was to have developers beaten down the door to work at our company so that when we needed to hire, because it was a different job market back then too, because Fang was going crazy and offering 500 grand a year for a senior engineer. They're not doing that anymore.
Dang.
But you know, what we started doing was, we were in the middle of Franklin, Tennessee, so a fairly grown up city,
Affluent.
but not big
Mhm.
city like Nashville or New York or LA.
Right.
But what we did was we started hosting meetups, and it started out by just having key members of our team hosting or organizing is the word, organizing a meetup for their particular tech stack. So um, we did a Java users group, we did a PHP users group, we had a mobile development group, and we started hosting those out at various restaurants and venues around town, and we started to become, I won't say synonymous with the meetup culture, but eventually we moved into a new building that didn't leak and wasn't kind of gross looking, and so we started actually hosting the meetups there. And so you get to see, not only do you see the office, you see the offerings. We've got a cool space
Yeah.
that's kind of nice, and it led to something that I still really miss to this day, which was a I'm going to say family type environment, but it, like, we had a cohesive group that we
Hmm.
we did stuff together outside of work, and often that stuff together that we did outside of work looked a lot like work, but it didn't feel like it. So we go in and we
That's
use
really
our
cool.
skills to do development during the day, and then we go home and we hone our skills
Yeah.
to do development the next day. And but we're all doing it together, and it felt really loose and
That's really cool.
right. I don't know, and we got to wrap this up, but I'm going to throw the question out as a thought experiment, and I want, dear listeners, I want your feedback as well. So, how do you build that same level of cohesive community when nobody lives in the same town and nobody works in the same place and everybody's spread out all over the place? And maybe first question is, can you do that?
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to think about this. This is
Well,
this is a good idea.
yeah, I think I think the answer is no, you can't. And I'm going to caveat, because I like, if you've known me for 28 episodes, you know that I like to be a little bit inflammatory. I don't think you can build the same degree of community, because I think in-person interaction is what leads to a lot of those bonds. Like, there's pheromones and all kinds of stuff biologically that make that work. But what you can do is build enough of a community so that people feel comfortable sharing parts of themselves that they wouldn't otherwise share. You don't do it through mandatory fun. Nobody gets to know anybody by sending 1,700 pictures of their dog every Halloween. While that can be fun and entertaining, it's not the secret sauce. You've got to
It's
start
not the
with a
way to
series
build that
with a
bond.
you got to start with a foundation of trust, which is, we're
Yeah.
working together, we're fighting the same battles together, and we're honest with each other. Radical candor, the book's over there, but being honest with each other in a caring way means that when you screw up, I know that you're going to call me on my screw up, but also I know that you're not going to bash my head in at the same time.
Yeah. I think there's definitely something to the open and honest environment where you can admit wrong to, or you can admit that you screwed up. I always notice that that oftentimes builds trust in a team faster than anything else, is having a place where you could be vulnerable enough to say, oh yeah, I screwed up. That was my fault. And people tend to respond really well to that kind of candor. And it can honestly build a relationship better than it was before, because
Yeah.
it's just, if you're willing to be honest, that's trust verified.
Well, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap us here. There's 30 minutes and some change, but I do want your feedback. So, for those of you that are listening that made it in the whole 31 minutes, thank you, first of all. Appreciate your patronage. Go ahead, give us a like, a subscribe. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the channel, get the bell. You know the deal by now. But leave us a comment and tell us how you look at building community in a remote world. Whether it be maybe your family lives apart. How do you maintain that relationship? Maybe it's your work team. Maybe
Hmm.
it's a church group or a
Yeah.
social team, whatever. How do you maintain those relationships really well? And also tell me if you think that there is a possibility or not of building the same degree of community as an in-person group versus remote. Really interested to hear your feedback, and if we get some good feedback, I think I've still been threatening to do an engaging with engagement episode again. So if we get some good comments, some good feedback, we'll bring them back up, and maybe we'll hash this episode out again. But as always, this is Plays Well with Others. I'm Andrew Moore, joined by Jess Agnew. Thanks for listening.